One, and welcome to the Winnetka Village Council regular meeting for November 5th, 2019. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask that everyone in the room please turn off or mute your cell phones or other electronic devices. And we'll start out. I've asked Trustee Dearborn to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Rob, you want to go ahead and check quorum?
Certainly. November 12th study session. Anybody plan to attend? Okay. And then November 19th and December 3rd regular meetings.
Yes.
November 19th and December 3rd. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, item number 4, public comment. This is the time of the evening when anybody who wishes to address the village council on any item that is not on the agenda, they're welcome to come on up to the microphone and share their thoughts with us. Would anybody like to address village council this evening on items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, I will close public comment. We'll move forward with reports. Trustees, we'll start down with you, Jack. Any report? Andy?
No report.
No report.
John? Bob?
I would just make the comment that the pension reform proposed legislation, I believe, is slated to hit the legislative agenda next week down in Springfield. And we've asked Finance Director Sloth to provide some of the protective language that is part of the IMRF pension program that supposedly is going to be in this type of legislation that's being proposed, because again, my concern, I don't know if other people have the same concern, but my concern is simply how Village of Winnetka funds within the firefighter fund and the police fund, our public safety funds, will be protected from possible subsidizing other municipalities within the state or accessed by the state for other reasons. And we just want to see what that language is. So it may be an exercise in futility, but at least we will know, and if we have concerns, we can at least reach out to our state officials with those concerns.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Ann? Penny? All right, village attorney.
No report tonight.
Village manager?
I have a brief report. I would like to announce that Assistant Village Manager Megan Pierce has accepted the position of Director of Economic Vitality with the City of Louisville, Colorado. Megan will wrap up her duties here in Winnetka on November 21st. Megan joined Winnetka in 2012 as the assistant to the village manager and was promoted to her current position in 2016. Over her 7+ years with the village, she's taken on many projects and roles with the village and has been a valued and trusted member of the department head team. I want to thank her for her service and her contributions to the village, and we wish her continued success in her new role and much happiness in Colorado. Thank you, Megan.
Anything else, Rob?
That's enough.
Thank you. That is enough. And village president, 2 things. Yeah, Megan, we're really going to miss you. I mean, it's been really fun watching you grow over the last 7 years, and you know I'm not happy that you're leaving, and but I know that's the way things go sometimes. But we're all going to miss you greatly. And secondly, I just wanted to remind everybody. I can't believe I'm even talking about this, but on Friday, December 6th. We are having our annual tree lighting ceremony, and that'll take place at, 5 o'clock? Whenever it gets dark. And this year we've moved to Dwyer Park, where a new tree has been planted, and we invite everybody to come out and enjoy the tree lighting and then all the festivities that go along with that. And that's that. Item number 6, approval of the agenda. Does any trustee wish to remove an item on the consent agenda for a separate vote?
Comment on one of the agenda items without removing it?
Yes. You're gonna.
I did this on the, and I should have called before, but because I believe the gentleman is here But in the minutes of October 1st, our strong advocate of the Green Bay Trail was erroneously named Elisha White. And I know we're confused around here about our color scheme, but it's Elisha Gray. And so I think for the record, that should be corrected.
Thanks, Bob.
Was incorrect as well.
Other than that,
Sounds like today's news.
Okay, where are we? Okay, may I have a motion to, it screwed me all up. May I have a motion to approve the final form of the agenda?
so moved.
Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I'll ask the village clerk to read the items on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Approval of Village Council meeting minutes for October 1st, 2019, regular meeting, and October 10th, 2019 study session, and October 15th, 29 regular meeting. Approval of the warrant list dated October 11th through the 31st, 2019, in the amount of $1,529,552.26. Resolution number R81, 2019, adopting updated Cook County Hazard Mitigation Plan for adoption, and resolution number R82, 2019, purchase of a police vehicle for adoption.
Thanks, Rob. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda by omnibus vote?
So moved.
Roll call vote?
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Lanfair? Trustee Wedner? Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi?
Great. Item number 8, patient rescue recognition. We have both Alan and Mark here to do their thing.
Firefighters and police officers who made a difference in a person's life. We'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about a call that resulted in a very positive outcome. The positive outcome was as a result of a great team effort and a response to a very critical situation. Before we begin, I have a representative from Amita St. Francis Hospital, that is our paramedic resource hospital, Sarah Van Dusseldorp, the EMS coordinator. I'd like her to say a couple words.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here tonight. But I'm very happy to be here and very proud to be here with the firefighters, the dispatchers, the police officers. This is actually what we want to see. We train over and over for all of our providers, and it's almost like the stars align. This was a perfect example of how things would work, with starting with the dispatcher giving direction to bystanders and bystander CPR and how important that is. The police officers who arrived on scene and used their AED, up to the paramedics who then were able to continue on with advanced care, and then all the way to the hospital. And it made a difference in people's lives. And when things go the way they're supposed to, this is exactly the outcome that each one of these guys strive for every single day. So we're happy to be here to honor them. They definitely deserve it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to ask Deputy Chief John Ripka to step to the podium. He's going to describe the incident while Chief Hornsey and I hand out the recognitions. John?
So I get the honor of sharing the story that brought everyone here tonight. So 2 months ago, on September 15th, a 64-year-old male resident of New Jersey was in Kenilworth for his 50th Sears School reunion. He decided to join in a game of basketball around 11:30 a.m. when he went into cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest is when a person's heart and breathing stops. In essence, they are clinically dead. Fortunately for this person, his friend immediately began CPR, and another person called 911. Upon calling 911, police and fire were dispatched. Another thing you might not know is while we are going en route to the scene, the 911 operator stays on the phone with the caller and provides pre-arrival directions, which include CPR and respiratory assistance instructions. Winnetka and Kenilworth police officers arrived first, and they both immediately went to work. One took over CPR, the other hooked up an automatic external defibrillator, or an AED, to the patient, and the machine delivered a shock. Fire crews from both Winnetka and Wilmette arrived. Anytime we get a call of a cardiac arrest, we send 2 ambulances, our engine, and the shift commander. For comparison, in the ER, for a cardiac arrest, there is a team of about 12 to 15 people working on the patient, so our regular EMS response of 5 to 6 people would not be adequate for the advanced life support care necessary to give the patient the best possibility of a positive outcome. Fire crews hooked the patient up to the monitor when they arrived and saw a sinus rhythm with a corresponding pulse. They then secured an IV, provided fluids, and continued to support his airway and respirations while they went to the hospital. Our patient, Jeff McBride, made a full recovery, and here's a picture of him in the hospital as well as back at home in New Jersey. So this call, as Ms. Dusseldorp said, is a perfect example when everything came together to save this man's life. The bystander's CPR and simultaneous 911 call, the 911 operator pre-arrival instructions, and the police officers continuing good CPR and delivering an AED shock, and the paramedic providing all the necessary advanced life support interventions in order to sustain the patient on the way to the hospital. Last week, the Village of Kenilworth recognized the citizens who assisted that day, so tonight we would like to recognize the first responders. So in order of appearance that day, first we would like Matt Rutledge to come forward. Matt was the 911 call taker. This is the person on the other end of the phone who answers those hectic 911 calls and still has the ability to remain calm. Matt calmly took the caller information, transferred the incident information to another 911 operator to be dispatched, and continued to provide the pre-arrival instructions to the bystanders. The job of a 911 telecommuter is truly a job for a very special, talented person. So next, can Winnetka Officer Helwig and Kenilworth Sergeant Padilla please come forward? These 2 officers became fire medics for a few moments to administer CPR and an AED shock, which converted the patient to a normal heart rhythm. Again, remaining calm, cool, and collected, they performed their task quickly and very efficiently. Officer Helwig and Sergeant Padilla. So next we'll have the fire crews that day, the crews of Engine 28, Ambulance 28, and Battalion 28. Please step forward as I call your name. Captain Tom Hutchison. Lieutenant Andy MacArthur. Lieutenant Scott McHale. Fire-medic Chris Kopecki. Fire-medic Johnny Sengmany, and fire-medic Jack Poplowski. These 6 individuals took over the patient care, including heart monitoring, airway, IV fluids, and oxygen. They kept the patient stable while being transported to Edmonton Hospital, where the patient received a surgically implanted pacemaker and was released 12 days later. We would like to commend everyone for their actions that day, and congratulations.
Thank you, guys. Great job. Should be buying beers after this, right? All right, well, we'll continue on with the balance of the agenda.
I just like to say that this is a pretty darn good way to spend our council meeting, so.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's really, this is terrific.
It's amazing,
We're-
it really is. Thanks so much. Okay, item number 9, the Winnetka Music Festival. The village is being asked to sponsor the 2020 Winnetka Music Festival, which has been a great success the past 2 years. For the 2020 event, the Winnetka Northfield Chamber of Commerce is contracting with Vales List LLC for planning and event execution. The Chamber, along with the Park District and the Winnetka Community House, will also be supporting the event. Here to present the request for village sponsorship is Scott Myers. Welcome back, Scott.
That's a tough act to follow. So yes, I hadn't expected myself to be standing up here for the 4th year in a row, but once again, we are planning the Winnetka Music Festival. And would just like to kind of go through real quickly kind of where we are with the fest in terms of last year and what we're looking at for next year. You know, I think that for those of you who have had a chance to attend, you know, the festival has been a growing success, and I think that in terms of not only here in Winnetka, but also on the North Shore and even regionally, we're beginning to see some traction and some recognition for this festival. You know, certainly in terms of visibility for Winnetka, bringing people to the village, people hearing about the festival, I think that we've continued to see, you know, growing traction over the past 3 years. And you know, just in terms of a sample of comments that we get on social media, this obviously does not include the number of comments that are made to volunteers, made to the staff members, made through the caucus survey. You know, I think that what we see is a pretty robust interest in the festival, a great way to kind of kick off the summer and a way to kind of take pride in the village and the unique situation, the unique village that we have. So for 2020, we're pretty much doing it all over the same way that we did last year, in the sense of we're going to continue to focus on top emerging artists, groups from really around the world. I mean, we have not only the U.S., but Australia and Canada and England, and you know, the goal is to try and find artists that are some of the best from around the world. Pretty much the same scale in terms of number of stages. The one thing that we are focusing on improving next year is this seems to be a very hungry village. We never seem to have enough food trucks. So we will be expanding the food area again next year, ramping up from 15 different food vendors to somewhere probably closer to 20 different food vendors that will be out on the streets, both local as well as the food trucks. One of the things that we've also learned for the past few years, I've been the one doing the marketing, and while I may fancy myself having a lot of talents, I'm not a marketing expert. We are bringing in somebody who is much more savvy in terms of social media and some of the marketing capabilities. So I think we'll have a little bit more impact, which should mean more people. A couple new things that we're doing. We've actually started a collaboration with New Trier High School. Last year we brought in Skokie School. They had engagement at the family stage. We've now engaged with New Trier High School and their marketing class and have some students that are involved there. So it's just part of the effort to try and further engage the community and different aspects of the community in making this festival successful. And then also we're exploring a variety of ideas in terms of allowing maybe more intimate conversations and engagement with the artists. So in terms of support from the Village of Winnetka, as President Rintz said, what we're looking for is, as in the last few years, is $25,000 from the village. It's a lot of money. It represents about 7% of the total funds that we have to raise, which in one sense you say, well, that's such a small amount, why do you even need it? one of the challenges that, quite honestly, we face in the music festival is the stability of funds and the timing of those funds. About 45% of our money comes from sponsors. And that money, in that sponsor, I'm including the village and the park district. Sponsor revenue tends to come a little later, tends to come in January, February, March timeframe. So one of the things that is of value to us by having the village and the park district engaged is not only the dollar amount, but the timing of that dollar amount, because it allows us to have funds to begin to contract with bands. So I think that's one of the things. Now, last year, we introduced ticketing. And I would say that our message on ticketing was somewhat muddled, right? We started out saying, well, it's going to be the final act, then it was the final, Saturday night. Well, what's Saturday night? Who needs a ticket? And ticketing helped last year, and I will say right now, we lost money last year. So the first 2 years, we made a little bit of money. Last year, we lost a little bit of money. And part of that was as the festival has grown in stature, we have stepped it up in terms of the quality of the music. That's something that we need to constantly reevaluate in terms of how much do we invest in that. But part of the reason I think we also lost money is because our message on ticketing was a little bit confusing. People didn't really know when did they need to have a ticket. So our plan for 2020 is that the whole event, Friday and Saturday, will be one ticket. Anyone 21 and older would be required to have a ticket. That does two things for us. One, it makes a very clear message in terms of who needs a ticket. It also provides another incentive for people not to show fake IDs, because anybody who wants to buy a beer or wine has to also have a ticket to the event. So it does a couple things for us. One is provides clarity in terms of the messaging. I think also makes it less expensive for families, but then also provides this other little buffer that we hope will continue our trend of not really having any incidences during the festival. Now, one of the things that we recognize is that this festival takes place in the streets of Winnetka, right? Winnetka residents are kind of sacrificing their downtown area. A lot of them obviously come and enjoy it, but we recognize there is, a bit of a burden. So one of the things that we're planning on doing is providing a special ticket price for Winnetka residents. And we're actually in the process right now of the planning for the communications on that. Those tickets, for all of you here or watching at home, will go on sale next Thursday. It will be a $20 ticket, and it will stay at that rate for Winnetka residents until January 15th. At that time, we'll start regular early bird tickets for everybody else. The ticket at the door will be $35. So this is a significant discount off of what people would have to pay if they waited until they showed up. One question might be, well, why not just have a special price for Winnetka residents all the time? Unfortunately, none of the ticketing software that we've looked at enables us to set a ticket price based on somebody's zip code. Right? You can't validate and set a price based on once they've entered their zip code associated with their credit card. So you could say, hey, just enter your zip code. The problem with that is obviously word would get out that, hey, you get a really good discount if you enter 60093. So we're kind of constrained by what the technology allows us. So we're going to try and target the messaging to Winnetka residents. We'll be out at the December 6th holiday festivities. We'll be putting ads in the Winnetka Current so that people in Winnetka know about it. And we'll be targeting our social media ads to just Winnetka for the next 2 months. So we want to really give the Winnetka residents the opportunity to kind of get the tickets at the lowest price, given the sacrifice that they're trying to make. So our hope is that we can get the festival on a sound financial footing. We can make this something that continues on for a long time. Obviously, if it loses money, I'm certainly not going to take it out of my pocket every year keep this thing going. So, we've just got to get it to a point where this thing can perpetuate itself. So, happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Scott? Go ahead, Penny.
Penny?
I have one relative to, obviously everything is outdoors and planning for weather. I suspect that part of it last year as well was that the prediction for the weekend was really terrible weather.
And Friday night was a little chilly.
Yeah, so people like me, I just went ahead and made a plan to go out of town. So I don't know, fortunately, the weather turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you can do to, in the case of bad weather, it's just all off and that's it?
And, yeah, well, so we've always had a little bit of a fallback option, but it's not great because we don't have big venues here, right? We, between the chapel stage in Harkness Chapel, I've had a conversation with the folks at Christ Church in terms of their church across the street from the Village Green, the auditorium in the community house. Each one of those only holds somewhere between 200 and 300 people. So yes, you could put on small performances, but, last year on Saturday night, we probably had 6,000 people there, So it's, in the event of weather, we work with police and fire in the village in terms of, plans in terms of how do we communicate the delay, how long was the delay? If it was a complete rain out, we could have some small festivals, but obviously any in a torrential downpour, any beer and wine sales would be gone.
Right.
Right, because we couldn't really move that around.
Right. And there's no possibility for any kind of a, canvas. I don't know.
Yeah,
Right. So,
No.
that's.
Yeah,
that-
so it's,
that is the real-
we've been very lucky the last 3 years.
Right.
That's, quite honestly, one of our objectives is we have to build up a surplus because we know there is going to be a rain out. There is going to be some year of the festival is just going to be washed out. And, we got to have some kind of a cushion if we want to keep this thing going.
How does the proposed ticket program differ this upcoming year from past years?
Yeah, so last year, Jack, what we, let's set aside kind of the communications challenges that we had in terms of trying to get our message across. Last year, it was a $20 ticket if you purchased it ahead of time, and this is not including the VIP area. So a $20 ticket ahead of time, $25 at the door, okay? When we look at our costs, and when we look at the fact that what we want to try and do is encourage as many people as possible to buy ahead of time, our plan is $20 for Winnetka, $25 for early birds for everyone else, and then a $30 ticket maybe the month before, and then $35 at the door. We want to try and get people to buy early for a couple reasons. One is to avoid long lines at the festival entrances, and also to try and provide some financial cushion for the very reason that Penny indicated, which is if we have a rain out, then we're out all the costs and we have no revenue.
Is that, I must be having a senior moment because I don't remember paying money just to walk around the village.
You didn't? What?
It must have been special.
Yeah.
I thought that it was
Yeah, so last year, right. So last year, the communication was for the final two performances in the parking lot, that's where you needed a ticket.
That's what I.
We had a couple challenges with that. One is communicating that. Secondly is in terms of where to take the tickets. We had challenges, and I won't get into all the details, but you have to think in terms of, geez, how do I clear out that parking lot? Because there's performances during the afternoon. How do I clear out that parking lot and then set up ticketing and then let everyone back in? So what is easier is we'll set up 3 different ticket-taking areas, one on Elm Street Bridge, one on East Elm Street, and one north on Pine. And as people come into that area, we'll take tickets. Now, if somebody gets off the train and says, hey, I'm just walking through going to my house, fine, right? But if you go to buy a beer or wine, we're going to ask you to have a ticket.
So the change is gonna be, rather than having to pay to get to the specific stage, you're gonna have to pay to get
Right,
into the area.
right. So last year, you know, the $20 got you Saturday evening. This coming year, $20 gets you the whole weekend.
Have you sort of figured on how that might potentially impact attendance?
I don't think we have enough data to be able to accurately project how that would, you know, there's too many factors. No one seemed to object to paying $20 or even $25 for what they were getting, right? You go downtown and you go to see one artist for an hour and you're paying $30 or $35. So I don't think that the dollar amount will be an adverse effect on people's decisions. I think the clarity around kids being free will help. That was a little confused last year. I think that the other thing that will counter any issues we're hoping on the ticket price is more effective marketing, right? Just a more effective delivery of the messages about the Music Fest.
How will you guys handle the idea of people wanting to go to the stores during the day?
If somebody says, "Hey, I'm not here for the Music Fest, I'm just going to the store," we're just going to let them go, right? I think here again the governor on this that we're hoping is the fact that it's 21 and older. If you want to get a drink, you got to have a ticket, not only an ID band proving you're 21, but you also have to have a ticket. But if somebody says, you know, and we recognize we will probably have what I'll call leakage. Some people will say, "Oh, I just want to go have dinner at Little Ricky's with my family." Fine, right? If somebody is so desperate not to pay the $20, you know, we're not going to make a big stink about it. I mean, the idea is this is a community festival. We're trying to make it a good experience for people in Winnetka. I think the vast majority of people will be totally fine supporting the event, and if somebody wants to take advantage of it, that's their issue.
Is there any way to consider trying to make it so that the payment of the money or the ticket, I mean, you were explaining the difficulty you were having in trying to manage the crowds or access to the stages where money would be charged. Is there any way you could possibly reconsider that? Because my concern is that you'd be saying, like, if I wanted to go with my son and daughter back from college, it'd be about $100 to wander around, you know, get some food, drink some beer, and I'd be worried that kind of expense for a regular, you know, a resident for access to public space might create some trouble. I realize you've got a problem in terms of trying to.
Right.
Can I offer another idea? I mean,
Sure.
it does seem like it inhibits, and I think that our merchants might be a little bit upset about the idea of any kind of, you know, strangulation of foot traffic. But would it be possible to ask the vendors who are selling alcohol to add a $2 premium to each drink so that could be paid back to the music festival instead of asking for a ticket? I mean, they have the right to sell to people, and so to make drinks have like a festival tax or whatever you want to call it. A tax is something the municipality does, and I guess all of this kind of says, like, I don't think the village should be involved in figuring out how to fund it totally, but, you know, to the extent that we need to create freedom of movement in the downtown at the same time that the music festival is happening, it doesn't seem fair to cordon it off, you know, from anybody using it. You know, maybe it's like they're shopping in spite of the music festival, you know, even though I think it's a great event.
Yeah.
But just to ask, you know, vendors put an extra, you know, $2 on every drink that they turn over to you. I don't know.
So nice idea. So one of the challenges that we wrestle with every year is that the vendors in the festival grounds would like for their patrons to be able to take their alcohol outside. Now, that's not allowed by their liquor license, right? And that's something that we've had multiple conversations over the years with the police department, and that's not something the police department really wants. So I'm not sure that we're going to get any kind of a warm reception to say, hey, by the way, not only can your patrons not take their drinks out, but, oh, we also want you to make, you know, another $2 donation per drink to the Music Fest So your drink prices are now significantly higher than what we're,
Yeah, I don't think she was talking about the restaurants having a tax.
Like
The
the
beer
food
tents
trucks,
having a
you know,
tax.
and stuff
oh,
like
well, so
that.
we already get that revenue.
Oh, you already got.
Yeah, we get that, so the way the beer and wine work is, we buy that from a wholesaler, and then we're able to turn around and sell that, right? So yeah, that's already baked into what we're doing.
So what does a park district do on events when they, you know, or, I mean, I guess I'm looking for something analogous here that would help inform how to manage something that's of community value, but also now being managed by a private entity, you know, necessarily so, because it's a lot of work. But so how do you find a way for the public-private thing to happen and to democratize it in a sense? That's what tickets are trying to do, is to democratize it and ask people to pay for it. So, you know, are there other models that we have in the village of things that have worked in that way?
I mean, I'll let Rob answer that. I don't know of any other activity that is executed in this way, right? You look at 4th of July, well, 4th of July is executed at Duke Childs Field, right? One of the uniquenesses, and we've actually talked about, gee, should we move the music festival to Duke Childs Field? And it's something that, you know, I've really pushed back on internally, because this is not a community where people are wanting to go stand in a field and listen to music, right? It's part of it's being in the community, right? And being able to go to Little Ricky's or sit down and, you know, chat with your friends. So there's not another model, certainly that I've seen.
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard correctly. Is the ticket price is going to be charged for the entire length of it, or just
Yes.
for, just for?
Yes.
So it's all day as well?
Yeah, so it's like, it's $20, you pay $20 and you get in throughout the weekend.
Is that a final decision? I mean, is that still up for?
Well, we don't, I mean, we've thought pretty hard, and we don't know how else to do it, right? If you said, okay, you're not going to do it Saturday afternoon, okay, so at some point Saturday, you're going to clear everybody out of the downtown, and now you're going to let everybody back in with tickets.
Well, I mean, when thinking about, you know, the original premise for, you know, how we thought about it, it was that it was something that everybody could enjoy. You know, it's on village streets. It's, you know, that we're asking our, you know, our commercial entities along there to kind of give up something, and you know, our residents are paying for it as well. I mean, providing some money. So I was okay with, you know, paying for it in the evening, but the fact that, you know, a 22-year-old couldn't just go up and wander around for 45 minutes and then go, I mean, you know, it's just, it feels different. It feels different really as a community event to require payment for the entire time. So this is the first I've heard of it,
Yeah.
so I'm just talking out
Right.
loud.
I mean, this is the balance of how do you create an event that everybody likes and make it sustainable?
Yeah, so
Right.
wait, how many tickets do you need to sell to come to some kind of, you know, financial solvency? Do you know
Right,
that?
so last year we sold about 2,000 tickets.
Okay,
We need to sell probably more like 4,000 or 5,000 tickets.
so an appeal to voluntary contribution, like they have at museums when you walk in and you put $20 in the jar, because you like, you know, they don't have an admission fee, but it's left up to volunteer. I think some of the art shows in the city, like Old Town Art Fair, might do that, or maybe it's not voluntary anymore. But, so there's no sense of like a voluntary contribution to help defray costs or
Yeah.
keep this going?
So, year 2, we tried that. We found it very, the volunteers were very unwilling to ask their neighbors to make a contribution. Right, so, you know, I think that here again, what we have found is volunteers seem to be very willing to come out and serve beer and, you know, pass out information and help at the stages, help in the VIP area. But when you start asking your neighbors, you know, hey, I want money from you, then that's one of the challenges. Now, one of the things that we're looking at, which is going to add costs this year, is, you know, the other side of the equation is, the festival is not sustainable as a totally volunteer experience. right? It's just, I put in probably 1,000 hours, a year on this. So we have to bring in an operations organization, which we're going to dip our toe in the water this year and see, okay, how does that work? Because we want them to take on, the ticketing responsibility, take on some of the responsibility of, serving beer on Saturday night, right? Everyone wants to be at the concert, not selling beer. So, voluntarily giving money is what it does two things. One, it's a challenge in terms of getting people to ask, and two, right, if the weather is bad and no one shows up, this thing doesn't just go 10,000 in the red, it goes 40 or 50,000 in the red and it's dead.
But don't you have to refund the money if the weather is bad? Aren't you going to?
What we're saying is, we'll refund up until like 30 days before.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's uncomfy, the whole thing. I think it's
So,
hard.
so the challenge is, right, do we want it to be sustainable or not, right? If you say, yeah, this is something we want to keep going, then there has to be some financial reliability to it, right? And right now, you have 2 residents that are backstopping this whole thing. And if you're saying, well, we want it to be where people can give a voluntary donation at the site, well, those 2 residents are taking on all the risk, and the festival won't go. I mean, not speaking for the other resident, but I'm not going to take that on. So,
Go ahead.
it's a balancing, right? We're all trying to figure out a balancing act.
Let me, first off, I don't really know the purpose of the conversation. I think the purpose is, are we willing to provide $25,000 support?
Is there action
For me-
required tonight?
Whether there's action or not, for me, the answer is yes on that. This is,
We've already budgeted it.
we budgeted, this is a tremendous event in Winnetka. They are experimenting. We've all followed Scott and Val and Mark for the last few years trying to figure this out. We're still trying to figure it out. I respect the way they're trying to figure it out. They're saying for $20, you can come Friday and Saturday, wander around. If you come and you say, gee, I'm not really here, but I'm going to go listen anyway, they're not going to charge you the $20. I mean, I don't see this as, something to put a line in the sand and say they're doing it wrong. I mean, they're giving it a lot of thought. It's a great event for Winnetka. I know there's a little controversy around it, and there may be some controversy that comes out of some of the change. I mean, it's inevitable probably, but, this village gets a lot of mileage out of this music festival for $25,000, plus great support from our public safety group, utility, if nothing else, seeing the public safety officers out there and, mingling with the people, there's value right there. So I don't think we should spend a lot of time up here trying to micromanage this festival, quite honestly. I think that if around the dais here, there's not support for the $25,000, that should be voiced. You don't want to support the $25,000, fine. But to sit here and question how they're doing ticket pricing and so on,
I think that we have to do that because we're being asked to approve basically putting a fence around.
we're not putting a fence around the village. We're not putting a fence around the village.
We're saying you can't go into this area conceptually unless you pay between $20 and $35 a head. If I want to go sit at Cafe Aroma and have a cup of coffee
And listen to the music, yes, I think you should pay your $20 or $25.
so what's the owner of Cafe Aroma going to think about all the people who can't go and sit in her restaurant?
I think she'll be pretty happy about having 10,000 people walking around.
But you're also, but that's not, this is village this is.
I
And you're asking, and it's saying you have to pay $35 to walk around the village for a certain period of time. Again, I understand the idea about if somebody's just cutting through, but can you imagine that enforcement nightmare if people are walking through? I mean, I like the idea of a la carte. If you want to buy beer, then you buy a wristband for $10, and then you can buy your beer. If you want to go hear the music at the stage that was over by the community house, again, I know you've got the problem.
Yeah.
But if you want to say, I'm going to go hear that music, I don't know.
Yeah.
As I said, the difficulty for me is saying that And again, I'm all for the $25,000. And I really think the festival's a wonderful thing, but I'm just having a conceptual.
Sure, and I get it. You know, the challenge is, in a sense, what you're asking, and maybe this is what you are, some of you may want to ask this, is you want two residents to backstop this financially, right? Because if you say, well, you only pay $20 or $10 or whatever when you buy a wristband, what you're saying is we want you to front all the money, pay all the bands, and if this thing is a rain out, you guys are out of the money. You're out. You've lost that money. I'm happy to have you join us.
I mean, it's brutal on the people who are doing it, but then that's less a question for the village, and more a question for the music festival as an organization.
Well, but Jack, I think that if that's your philosophy, then I think you're missing. It's going to lead you to a decision where you, in a sense, say, well, I've got this beautiful philosophy, but I'm going to kill the music fest. Well,
We don't charge people to go to the 4th of July.
that's right. And the village pays a higher percentage of that, right? We're going out and raising 93% of the funds privately, right? And looking for 7% of the funds to come from the village to try and get, provide the seed money as we go into this each year.
I think that we could provide more than 7% of that, but again, the problem that I again have is the limiting of public access to the downtown. To public land.
Well, Jack, the one thing I want to point out is that there's probably 20 festivals in the city of Chicago that close off the street. I know there's one up on North Lincoln Avenue. I've been to the one in Fulton Market. Ann, you mentioned the art festival. There's another one down on Wells that happens in Old Town, and they do the same thing. They close it down, and of course we're not the city of Chicago, but for literally one morning, people won't be able to saunter up to Cafe Aroma and have the breakfast that they were looking forward.
Well, they can do it in the morning, actually.
Well, okay.
The morning is fine. It's just starting at noon.
No, but the point is that this is a model that I think Scott and Mark and Vale are trying to morph into something that makes sense financially, because, the whole idea of this, of putting Winnetka on the map as a music community was how the whole thing started out. And they're learning along the way. And with it comes some limitations and some restrictions. Is everybody going to be happy about this? Of course not. But I can tell you this, because I've talked to most of the merchants there, and they are really thrilled and excited with the idea of the Music Fest, because now they're starting to understand how they can profit from the opportunity of having the people outside. It's taken a while, because, everybody has to figure out, what do I do with all these people, and how do I get them in my store, and even more importantly, once I get them in my store, how do I get them to spend? But that's part of the evolutionary process too.
And we may learn stuff next year that causes us to say, all right, well, let's try a different model the next year.
So kind of a tough one, just personally, I walked over there with 12 friends of ours that came over, hung out for 2.5 hours and went home. That's gonna now cost me 12 times $35.
If
So
you
we
don't
won't
get them
go
to
at that
pay.
point. I mean,
Right.
and
Right.
that's kind of the
Right,
nice
right.
part about it. Come hang out, come over for a couple hours, leave, and then the 25,000. I haven't seen numbers yet. How much are they costing our police fire? Extra money, aside from that 25,000. That's probably a pretty big number.
Yep.
I mean, what is that number?
There's,
I don't mind investing more than 7% or $25,000 to do what we're doing to support the festival. My problem is just a conceptual.
You-
The festival is wonderful.
you-
And Chris is right about what they do in the city. Yeah, they do that.
Well, we
you
can
know what?
continue to be.
Right.
I'd like to hear, Scott, if you'd like to, is there anybody from the audience who would like to comment on the music festival or have anything to say about it? I don't want to miss public comment on this. We've been hogging the microphone so far, so.
yeah.
All right, thanks, Ron.
Right.
But we'll bring it back up here for conversation then.
Is there, I'm looking at the agenda item, I'm sorry, there isn't any action that we need to
So
take, is
because,
there?
Scott, we had encouraged him to come to the council and explain the program for the year.
Right,
Because there were changes.
Right.
So typically, it would be a discussion and then a subsequent approval of the sponsorship by resolution once the budget is approved. So this was an opportunity for him to present the format for the coming year. If there's consensus to support it with our sponsorship, then it would come back for approval at a later date.
you know what, if I could suggest this, we have a really busy agenda. The presentation was really interesting and it was great, but it wasn't information that was in the packet, so I'm just hearing that for the first time. So I would propose that we talk about it at our next meeting, just so that we have time to think about it and say something logical. I just feel like I'm reacting at the seat of my pants. And so that we can move ahead with our other two really lengthy agenda items. Would that be possible?
I really don't like deferring items over to other agendas and on items like this, Penny.
The other thing on,
It's sort of a change in the concept, which I understand, but I was not prepared for, so
Well, we did talk about this at the budgeting session, and at that time, Rob brought up the fact that it was going to be a ticketed event.
the other thing, Scott, where's Scott? Oh, there he is.
You can come back now, Scott.
He left. Just so I understand this, I mean, so if I walk uptown and I'm going through town and I stop and I listen to the music on Elm Street for a little bit or on Lincoln or whatever, and is someone going to come up to me and say, "Where's your ticket"?
So
it's
if
gonna
you
work.
walk in, right, so there'll be 3 points where we will ask people, right, if they have bought a ticket or if they're willing to buy a ticket, right? So if you from where you live, if you came East Elm, there'll be an area there and they'll say, do you have a ticket? And if you said, I'm just walking across, or I need to go to XYZ, or I just,
Big difference, though, from what you just said. If you bought a ticket, are you willing to buy a ticket?
yeah.
So if I'm going to listen to the music, I should darn well buy a ticket. I mean,
I would certainly hope.
And if I'm someone who's just kind of walking around, I really didn't mean to be there, but I'm there and I'm listening, no one's going to grab me and say, where's your $20 or $30? I don't see that happening.
No.
I think if people are going to the festival, they're not going to object to buying a ticket. They may not go with 12 people at the last minute. I get
Or pay
that.
for all 12 people.
Pay for all 12 people, whatever it is. And, this thing will fall apart. I mean, I think it's just going to fall apart if we don't certainly support it with the 25,000 and let them give this a go. I mean, I agree with Chris. I don't, they should we should either say, you're not going to get the streets now, we're not going to give you the streets, or give it a go and, make it work, but not make them go back and redesign this thing.
Yeah, quite
months
honestly,
before,
I always appreciate the council voicing their perspective. But we've thought about this
Yeah.
for a lot longer than the 15 minutes, and we don't see another way to kind of meet the objectives of making it financially sustainable, de-risking this, quite honestly, to some extent, and trying to make it relatively fair for the residents of Winnetka.
And I had brought up at the budget session about, I'd like to see the cost of the public works, the police, the fire.
right.
And maybe financials on the music fest. Are they losing money? I don't know. He just tells us they are. Not that I don't believe you, but.
Come on, John.
So the original structure was that the village would sponsor the event with a $25,000 contribution, but we would also support it with in-kind contributions of village staff. That means the waste collection,
Right.
public safety planning, all the staff that you see out there for the event. The rationale for it was similar to how we sponsored the same kind of events with the Park District. We fund the Park District to the tune of $38,000 a year for fireworks and Memorial Day, but we also provide significant staff support to make that happen.
But they're
That
not
was
looking to
generally
make
the
money
model.
on it.
Pardon me?
But they're not looking to make money on it.
No, they're covering their costs.
Right.
Right. And I think essentially you're covering your costs except.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're trying to create some kind of a, contingency fund.
I'm just asking if it's
Well-
transparent on numbers, so we can.
Yeah,
all-
sure, we'll track it, and
Yeah.
it's on our follow-up list to provide it. And the Music Fest has reimbursed the village for hard costs, and that's average about $10,000 a year for traffic control signage and barricades and things like that, electrical revisions.
Right.
So,
Well, I think it's a pretty simple conversation. We either look at this music festival and understand that it's something that is a community we desire, and we're going to put our faith and trust in several community residents who vision this and have brought it forth and who are willing to put in all this time and effort to bring something really special to this community, or we don't. You know, and it's always easy to sit up here and grandstand and say, well, why don't you do it this way, or why don't you do it that way, or I can't get my plate of eggs on Sunday morning. I mean, you know, we can be really silly and the smartest people in the room about something that other people have thought about for many, many, many hours, and I can guarantee you have debated between themselves extensively before they ever brought this thing forward. So that's really what it boils down to. Do we have faith in the promoters and the people that are doing this to do the right thing? Scott, certainly, you know, as this thing gets deeper in, I think one of the things we do have to answer to the public is, you know, if we are underwriting a wildly profitable venture, okay, but I'm just saying, and you've sat up here and you know this, right? I mean, so this should be no surprise to you that if we were in a position as a village where we were underwriting a wildly profitable venture, then there would be a conversation to be had that maybe we should think differently about it. But that hasn't been the case, and there's been nothing to indicate that what you and Mark have told us, not only at this, but at the previous time you appeared, that, you know, this is a really tight operation here, and if we want to have something special that helps define our community and adds to the benefit of being a resident of this community, then we step up and we write the $25,000 check and give them the streets and the parking lot for the weekend. If we don't want to do that, then we should decide so, and we shouldn't budget for it in the 2021 budget. So, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so I think it's a great event. I support the 25,000. I support the, you know, try something. If it works, great. If it doesn't, try something else. And I think that's sort of where we're at. And I think if Scott and company hadn't been willing to kind of take that approach, we wouldn't be where we are today, and I appreciate where we are. So one thing, you know, I do anticipate there'll be some discomfort about, you know, freedom of movement, right? And I shouldn't have to pay $20 to get around my damn village that I pay some, and I get that. So I think instead of getting hung up and spun around the wheel on the $20 ticket thing, which I think is perfectly reasonable, I think what we should do is just maybe at some point have a little discussion about here's the freedom of movement plan, you know, like here's how a resident could get from point A to point B. You know, just maybe it's, and I know you guys go through this in like crazy detail, so you'll have maps and everything, but just basically something that shows, you know, here's like a route. If you wanted to get from the corner, hypothetically, of Maple and Elm, go to the Grand 12 times for grocery shopping, how would you do that? Or, you know,
It's called Pine Street.
that hill is steep though. So, you know, but I think if we address the freedom of movement issue, I think we'll go a long way towards bringing down the angst level.
Yep.
And I think whenever you hear this kind of feedback, it's important not to get into the, you know, yes versus no, as opposed to what's causing that angst. And I honestly think that's what it is. It's just people need to know they're going to be able to get around. And I know they'll be able to get around, but let's maybe just kind of hash out those details, because I think the $20 for what you deliver is an amazing deal. And I'm not going to pay it. I'm just going to sit in my house and listen to the walls shake.
So,
No, I'll pay it.
so, because it's on my agenda and I'm just a talking head most of the time here, the question that I have here is, where the hell is it now? This is the part Scott used to love. When I fumble through my agenda trying to remember what it is I'm supposed to say.
There's no recommendation.
You can make the motion for me, Scott. Does the council wish to sponsor the 2020 Music Festival according to the terms that Scott outlined for us this evening? We don't need a voice vote, just a quick straw poll.
Yes.
There you have it. We're behind you 100%, Scott.
Ish.
In our own, in our true Winnetka way, we're behind you all the way. You've heard of the Bronx cheer, that's the Winnetka cheer right there, so. You got it, so. Thanks for coming out tonight, Scott, I appreciate it. All right, and Brian, you better be quick. Ordinances and resolutions. Resolution number R80, 2019, approving a pole attachment license with the Chicago Wireless SMSA DBA Verizon Wireless. Village staff has been working with wireless providers to develop license agreements for the installation of small cell wireless facilities on village poles. Here to review is Water and Electric Director Brian Keys.
Thank you for the introduction, President Rentz. So as you recall, the state enacted a public act for the deployment of small wireless facilities. The village council, under the direction of the village attorney, we amended or introduced and adopted ordinance MC4 2018 for small wireless facilities. The state act grants wireless carriers wide access to our utility poles, which includes traffic signals, streetlight poles, and electric distribution poles. Two carriers, Verizon and AT&T, have already approached the village about putting those facilities on our poles in accordance with the state law. Representatives from Verizon are here tonight, and before you is a pole attachment agreement that the village attorney and staff have tentatively negotiated with Verizon. What it does is outline basically what I'll call the working arrangement between the village and Verizon on their use of our poles in accordance with the state public act. And this has things to do with the maintenance of the pole, termination of an agreement if they fail to pay their utility bill, insurance requirements, their notification of the village if they're going to be doing work in the right-of-way that's going to obstruct traffic. Those types of elements are what's contained inside the pole agreement. At the end of the pole license agreement, should you approve it, is actually identification sheets that will be added by staff for each site that's approved under the permit basis that goes through community development and water and electric. Those would become identification sheets showing each identified site for the respective carriers. The resolution before you would grant the village manager the authority to approve a future pole license agreement with AT&T Mobility, should it be substantially in the form that's before you tonight. And then it also would allow staff to add those additional sites as they're approved through the permitting process. So with that, there are representatives. We have Jessica DeWalt, who's a manager in Verizon's Real Estate and Regulatory Group, and their consultant, Tom Ferry, with Buell Consulting, who's done some of the design work. They don't have a formal presentation prepared, but should there be council questions that go beyond what I can address or the village attorney can address related to Verizon's involvement, they'd be happy to take your questions, and I'll turn it over to you for consideration of the resolution.
Great. Okay, does anybody up here have any questions for Brian on this issue?
So these are the first, these will be the first small cell installations, correct?
Yeah, so I didn't cover it, but as outlined, they've tentatively identified 8 locations, or they have plans for 8. There's 3 that are under permit, 4 that are going back and forth with council, and potentially 1 future site. This is with Verizon, and I think AT&T's around 6 sites that they're eyeing up right now on, and have started their initial design work, but they haven't submitted formally to the village.
It was a little difficult to tell just from the schematics, but there are things sticking out. The cell sites stick out from the poles. What's the height? I mean, it's.
So the height, they're limited, I believe, to going 5 foot above the existing utility pole. 10? Is it 10? Okay, 10 foot above the existing utility pole structure.
Actually, I was talking about the ones that are down lower on the side. I'm wondering,
So the dimensions of the equipment that's lower on the pole is actually governed by its total volume, is what's contained in the state law. So there's a cubic foot dimension that the sum of all their equipment cannot exceed. There's no specific dimension that covers how many inches away from the pole they can. It's just a total volume of equipment that can be attached to a pole.
Because just from the way it looks like it's like head height and somebody could whack their head on it, but
I'm sorry, it's definitely not, as far as the vertical height, no, it's not a point where someone, a bicyclist or a person walking, is going to be able to hit themselves on. It's above above a pedestrian or a
Oh,
bicycle
okay,
site. I'm sorry.
okay,
I
okay,
misunderstood
yeah,
your
thank you, I
question.
wasn't clear.
The
Right.
drawing shows 8 feet.
8 feet. How did I miss that? Okay.
Most of these
I don't see any.
located back on property, or are they forward visible?
No, so the state, this right that they have to use our right-of-way is, again, public right-of-way. And so it's only those utilities or utility poles that are located in the public right-of-way. So actually, most of them are going to be along the streets, at the front of houses. So Verizon, to the extent possible, has been working with us in trying to locate them in, I'll say, the least impactful to the residents, by shifting them down or to a side area. But they're going to be located wherever you see a streetlight pole, traffic signal, or electric distribution pole, that's where they're going to be located. That's in a public right-of-way. Those utility poles that are at the back, where they do exist, at the rear of the properties, a lot of those are in easements, and the Public Act doesn't give them permission to go on those poles without a separate agreement.
I'm okay with it, I just wish AT&T were putting some up too.
All right, I'll open up the microphone to the audience. Does anybody in the audience wish to speak to this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment. I'll bring it back up here for any other additional comments or consideration.
Not a lot we can do about it, right? I mean, in terms of the specifics or kind of, right?
There's, as previously we introduced the ordinance, the state law significantly. Oh.
Oh, Did you want to speak, Mark? Come on up.
Mark Hecht. Excuse me, I understood, Brian, to say that adoption of this resolution would allow for a further follow-on agreement or agreements with AT&T if they followed the same format. And I understood Trustee Wedner's question to indicate that they weren't going to be entering into agreements with the village. Have I misunderstood something, or is this, I thought that this allowed for AT&T also to put up poles.
It does, Mark.
It does, they just aren't here tonight doing it. And I think anyone who has AT&T service would like for them to put up more. So that's all I'm trying to say.
Was wishful thinking. Okay, may I have a motion to adopt resolution number R80, 2019?
So moved. Second.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Trustee Kripe? Yes. Trustee Caladarchi?
Yes.
Trustee Lampier?
Yes.
Trustee Wedner? Yes. Trustee Dearborn? Yes.
Thanks, Brian. Item B, resolution number R83, 2019, approving the 2019 to 2022 agreement between the Village of Winnetka and the Metropolitan Alliance of Police. This is up for adoption. The Metropolitan Alliance of Police contract has been ratified by the police union, and now village staff is seeking council approval. Here to review is Assistant Village Manager Megan Pierce.
Good evening. So this agenda item begins on page 168 of your packet. So as the council will recall, you ratified our agreement with the International Association of Firefighters on April 4th of this year. We received our first proposal from MAP last October. Their current collective bargaining agreement expired December 31st of 2018. The village and MAP met on 6 occasions, both with and without attorneys. We had one session with a mediator over a 10-month time frame. On September 13th, the parties met, reached tentative agreement on all outstanding items, and then MAP ratified that agreement that attorneys reviewed on October 16th. So that's the agreement that is before you. Just wanted to highlight some of the key contract terms. The village agreed to a preference shift selection for our foremost senior officers. We negotiated a 45-day retirement notice in order for officers to be eligible to receive their retirement bonus. There will be a change in practice that discharge or suspension of officers will fall under the grievance and arbitration procedure rather than under our Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. In terms of economic fringe benefits over the contract period, employee premium contributions will increase. They are currently 11% for single, 11% for single plus one, and 12% for family. By the end of the contract period, which is a 4-year term, those will all go to 12.5%. The village will allow the union to establish a retiree health savings program through ICMA-RC. That is done at no cost to the village, but we are the administrative entity that has to facilitate that. We did also agree to increase the officers' uniform allowance beginning on January 1st of next year. From officers, that amount goes from $790 to $870, and for investigators, that increases from $950 to $1,050. In terms of wages, so the contract will expire 12/31 of 2022. In 2019, wage increases are 2.25%, and then in 2020, 2021, and 2022, they are 2.5%. Wages would be retroactive to January 1 of this year. Staff is meeting internally this week to talk about contract implementation. So we have 45 days to act on those retroactive wages, and we have several other policy issues that we plan to implement for January 1. So happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Megan? All right, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Would anybody in the audience like to speak on resolution number R83, 2019? Seeing none, I will close public comment. I'll bring it back up here. Any comments or questions?
I would only say this. I think, Megan, you worked awfully hard on this. You know, we all highly respect all of our public safety employees, police officers, firefighters, et cetera, immensely. But this is the reality of the world we're in, and this is a tough issue at times, and you did a wonderful job, and it's one of the reasons why we're so disappointed that you'll be leaving us, but hopefully everyone feels like this was in the end, a fair agreement for both sides, which I think it was, and you know, very well done to bring this one home. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I think MAP represents only our patrol officers, just for clarification with the audience, and I think we're leaving, at least me, the relationship on very good terms, and the village is also represented by other people on our bargaining team, so I feel assured that there will be good continuity to the next contract term.
Great, thank you. Okay, may I have a motion to adopt resolution number R83, 2019?
Trustee Wedner. Trustee Dearborn.
Yes.
Trustee Swerk.
Yes.
Trustee Kripe.
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi.
Yes.
Trustee Lampier.
Item C, resolution number R84, 2019, approving an agreement with the Lakota Group for comprehensive plan services. Over the summer, a request for proposal was issued for a consultant to assist the village with developing a new comprehensive plan. Here to review the results and recommendations is Community Development Director David Schoen. David, go ahead.
Yes, and so this evening, I want to acknowledge that Trustee Swerk, Plan Commission Chair Tina Dahlman, and Zoning Board of Appeals Chair Matthew Bradley participated in the process of selecting the consultant that we're presenting this evening. As President Rintz indicated, we went through a request for proposal process. The staff report goes into detail in terms of what that process was. In the end, we selected 3 firms to interview based upon the proposals submitted, the interviews that were held, and follow-up questions that were addressed by each of the consultant teams. The evaluation committee recommends that we hire the Lakota Group to engage the community in the development of our comprehensive plan, which, as you know, is to create the vision of where we want the community to be in the future. And in terms of creating that vision, it requires the engagement of the community. And in the end, speaking on behalf of the evaluation committee, we really thought that that was what set the Lakota Group apart from the other 2 firms, was in terms of their ability to start to identify issues for the community, how they would engage or communicate with the community, that we felt those were the critical parts as we prepare the vision for where we want the community to be in 15 to 20 years. This evening, Scott Freris and Becky Hurley from the Lakota Group are here, and any of us would be happy to answer any questions you have on the proposal. Their team consists of a few other consulting firms, sub-consultants, which are listed here on the screen. The schedule would be, we'd start as soon as you give us the go-ahead. We anticipate the process going into early 2021, and the services shall not exceed a little under $170,000. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or the evaluation committee would be happy to respond to any questions.
I have a question. Maybe there was an opportunity to ask this at the beginning before we got here, but it seems to me that it is weird to talk about a comprehensive plan process without including the other 3 taxing bodies, schools, libraries, and the park district. And I don't know how they're going to figure into this process, because as we know, the village itself, us, are only 12% of where people's tax dollars go. So how are planning this, how is it going to be implemented? How are we going to consider schools and parks and all the other things that happen in the village? It just seems incomplete for us to do this, and it's such a gigantic number. You know, I mean, $170,000 contract basically over a year and a half or 18 months to look at something, or maybe it's 2 years, to look at something from just a very narrow perspective, that if it is truly a comprehensive plan, I mean, maybe there's an idea to move a school to Elm Street. I don't know. You know, but the idea that we've made this narrow, carved out this narrow space for ourselves to think of something comprehensive it just intuitively doesn't make any sense to me. So that was my takeaway.
Well, and I'd be happy to ask Scott to come up and address that issue, because I think the Lakota Group has contemplated a multi-pronged outreach and an examination of the other comprehensive plans. Come on up, Scott, and talk about it a little bit.
Wouldn't they also pay for it then? I mean, why is the village paying for something? We're the smallest recipient
Becky,
of dollars.
either of you.
Don't be afraid.
We get 12%, schools and all those guys get so much more. Should they then contribute to this process?
Let's hear from our consultants on how they plan to address that issue.
Thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation with you over the next year and a half. And I think what you alluded to is right on. My name is Scott Freris. I am principal and president of Lakota Group. And Becky Hurley, my colleague, is with me. We are both community residents. And your point is very well taken. When we came in for our interview, that was exactly the point that we brought up, was that a comprehensive plan is only as good as you engage all of the civic entities that are responsible for moving this community forward. A comprehensive plan is always built by a village or a municipal entity. Park District has their own comprehensive plan. School districts have their own comprehensive plan, 36, New Trier. And it's our job to delve into them and meld everybody together. That means conversing, pulling out, finding out where there are synergies, cross-fertilization strategies, where we can start to work together and blend opportunity. We're not looking at a plan that's going to be implemented in 1 year. It's going to have a 1, 3, 5, 10, 20-year horizon to it. And in that same time period, as you know, the world changes rapidly. So our 2020 plan that was built in 1999, the amount of things that have changed in our society since then, including technology, has radically transformed how we communicate, how we work, how we do business, how our retail districts survive or don't survive. And your point is right on. We will engage those other entities. Frankly, we've worked with some of those other entities, and we know that they're thinking the exact same thing. How do we all come together? And when we presented and sat down before our steering committee, the very first thing we said is we believe the value we bring is not only our understanding of the community as long-term residents, but also having worked for those other institutions and knowing that there's a bigger conversation here. It's not just in this room, it's all those entities, and bringing it back here. There does have to be one entity that drives the ship, and in this case, it's the village, and that's where we'll take the lead on this project. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott, I appreciate that. Any questions for Scott?
Yeah.
Or David, or Becky, or?
No, we're done with that one.
Or Tina, or Matt, they're all here.
They're all
So have at it, guys.
So we're really bad at telling the future. What do you think is a reasonable, I mean, we're not so good at telling the present sometimes. What do you think is a reasonable period of time to look out for this plan? So we were 20 years last time. What's kind of the thing?
I would say that 10 is reasonable, but I think it's, state statute, I think is 20. And so we put 20 on there.
Yeah, but Illinois is very forward-looking.
Oh, yeah, Illinois might be underwater by the time we're done with the conversation, but they already are. And we're not going to solve that problem, but we are going to put ourselves in the position of understanding the world that's going on around us on a daily basis, and a good comprehensive plan leaves the door open for change. So that's the most important thing. I think what we've always found in all of the communities that we've worked with across the country is those that understand the flexibility that's inherent in a comprehensive plans are the ones who move forward. Those who live by the strict guidelines, the way it was formed, have a hard time. A lot of road bumps along the way dealing with change.
Good.
Any other questions? Go
May I-
ahead, Penny.
May I ask a question of David? Just because in the process itself, I agree with Ann that it's a big number, so the number should be scrutinized. And I was a little not surprised that it sounded like you didn't get bids, if you will, from the other proposers. That the scope of the work, you selected Lakota, which they're fantastic, they know the village as well as anybody, and oftentimes you select the highest bidder, or the low, whatever it might be. But did we get, how do we get a sense for the appropriateness of the cost of this project?
Sure. So, I mean, all 4 proposals submitted bids in terms of they submitted budgets. We, in terms of in that selecting Lakota, we then worked with them for the past month on refining the budget, identifying, in terms of identifying where we could justify the numbers, where we could refine the numbers.
Did we see those numbers?
No, you did not.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Were they all about the same? What?
They ranged from 148 to then the Lakota Group 169.
Okay.
And the Lakota Group number was higher, and we worked with them on refining that number.
Okay. As I say, I don't object necessarily to selecting the highest bidder because you may get more value that way. I understand that, but I just didn't remember seeing that part of the conversation.
Right. Professional services is not a hard bid,
Right.
but we could certainly come back and provide you, just for context, what the other ones were.
I might also add that the selection committee, John and Tina and Matt, worked really hard on the budgets and drove a lot of the conversations, and that this was a negotiated price at the end of the day, because there were some sort of, as you start to parse this, everybody has a different way of approaching the project, and we sat down with all the bidders and tried to figure out what were the necessary services, what were the services that they might be missing that we would like. And, you're never going to get a complete apples with apples because everybody has a little bit of a different flavor to how they approach comp plans. But there definitely was an analysis. As a matter of fact, John called me concerned one time about the numbers, and, we had to have several discussions to address that. And I don't know if you.
Yeah, it's been a great process. I mean, Dave has put a lot of time into it, Tina and Matt have, and I too was ultimately surprised, wow, just copy the old plan and make some changes and edit the Word document. It's not that easy. So maybe what Scott can explain is that it's not just Scott doing the work. He's got his consultants doing other items also. They're all part of that cost. So maybe that would help to explain those.
Well, it was in the
Okay.
the presentation,
All right.
right?
All right. So overall, I mean, I'm very comfortable with where we're at.
What I didn't get a sense of, I guess I didn't see that we actually received the 4 other bids.
Got it.
And I think that's important to have received those and then have assessed them appropriately, so.
Great, thanks.
I understand.
I would just like to add, having been deeply involved in the writing of the 2020 plan with Louise and Nan and the Plan Commission at that time. I'm really pleased with this contract. I've participated, Willow Road and some other things with the Lakota Group in terms of their community engagement sessions. And I mean, there's a lot about this plan that they've laid out that I really like a lot. And I have really been impressed with how they've run their community engagement sessions. The key, I think, to having a good comprehensive plan is to having deep and multiple conversations with the community. You can't just have, 45-minute sessions where you go and put dots up on the wall. I mean, you can, but really it's a process of the community digging into these issues themselves, not just the consultant doing it for us. It's really a situation where the consultant is working in partnership with the community to write the plan rather than the consultant writing the plan for the community. And I think that the amount of time that was spent last time with the participation of village members, both people on the council and community members, and having long conversations and hashing this stuff out, is that everybody had a greater sense of ownership and understanding of what this is all about. So this may be a little more expensive, but I think that planning for those kinds of opportunities is really important, and the long-term payoff will be significant. I also, I think what's really different about writing the plan this time than it was in 1990, or whenever it was, before 2000, 1995 or whatever. That's ancient history, I can't remember back that far, but is that lifestyles are changing more than they were at that point in time. And I hope that you all will spend some time talking not just with people here, but kind of understanding newer families, how are their needs changing, and families are staying in the city longer, but then moving up. What are the implications there? Why, who wants to move here, and not just who is here, but who wants to move here? And so I think developing the value of who we are and why this has been a stable community over time, but also what are we going to need to put in place to adopt a change as we have a new generation moving in. I think that's going to be much more of a challenge than it has been in the past. So I think that'll be a really interesting additional element of what this plan has to do. So I hope you'll all be thinking about that, as well as working with the different commissions. I mean, I know that sustainability, for example, is going to be a huge part of this component, and certainly our Environment Committee and Forestry has been thinking a lot about this. So, working with them, they're far more better versed in these topics than we are. So I'm really glad you all are doing it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Penny. I'd like to open it up are there any comments or questions from before I go there, Tina or Matt, do you want to add anything relative to the conversation? No? Well, I'll just say thank you both. I know this is a little bit of this is much more extra heavy lifting than your chairs typically have to do, and you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and thank you for putting in the extra time, and I know we're going to come up with a really great product at the end of the day.
It's super fun. Yep. It's really great.
Okay, would anybody in the audience like to speak on this issue? Come on up, Elijah. Mr. White.
Yeah, and Elisha Gray, 1125 Spruce Street. In looking at the Forward Winnetka 2040 plan, the brochure mentions the in-depth plans for all 3 business districts along the Green Bay Road. I would like it also to take a good look at the natural corridor gateway to Winnetka, the Green Bay Trail. There are generic mentions of bikeways and walkways and all, but I think that one of the things about the Green Bay Trail, it is a pretty discrete piece of property, and would encourage Scott and Becky to look at that in detail, and in a time frame that certainly would last 20 years, but be begun to be implemented within the 3 to 5 year plan.
Thanks, Elijah. I just wanted to add too, subsequent to the negotiation of this contract, but you know, we had our annual budget meeting, and Mr. Gray appeared there as well and spoke on the Green Bay Trail. And as a result, we've actually added a line item in the budget for an additional study on the trail that we'll be talking to you two about, is an add-on to your initial assignment, so that we can make sure that we do include something in there and we have the capacity to pick up the extra cost related to that. So, right on. Thanks a lot, Elijah. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Bring it back up here. Any final comments, questions, or observations?
I'd just like to thank Mr. Gray for championing the Green Bay Trail and keeping that on the forefront for us. I think it's a worthwhile effort.
Definitely is.
And it's a great example of where the crossover is between the different taxing entities, right? Because this is something that has to do with the village and also the park district. And that's why the comprehensive plan has to look at all the different taxing bodies and not just in isolation.
Agreed. All right, may I have a motion to adopt resolution number R84, 2019?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi?
Yes.
Trustee Lampier? Trustee Wedner? Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Motion carries, thank you. The village is getting their money out of us tonight, guys. Okay, item number 12, new business, 714 to 740 Elm Street and 511 to 515 Lincoln Avenue. CA Residential LLC Plan Development Concept Plan Review, case number 2019-34-PD, for information only. The village has received a Plan Development Concept Review application from CA Residential LLC. CA Residential is the designee of SB1 Winnetka LLC and SB Winnetka LLC, owners of the subject property. Tonight, the council and the audience will hear a concept review of 2 proposals for the site and provide feedback to the applicants. David is here to review it, but before he does,
I'm continuing to abstain from this one, and I have total confidence in this group, so thank you all.
thanks, Andy. Andy has to recuse himself due to potential
I'll come back
business
to my favorite
conflicts.
part, which is adjournment.
Or you can just sneak out the back door, one of the two, Andy. All right, so David's here to kick it off. Go ahead, David.
Yes, so first I would just like to mention and to remind the council and the public that the council recently amended your plan development process. And during that process, we added this step of concept plan review. And this is an opportunity for an applicant to present a concept to get some initial feedback from the council. Council members can make any comments, suggestions. The views are preliminary and advisory, and they're individual council member comments. The council will not be taking a vote. What you say tonight is not binding. So I just wanted to remind everyone in terms of what this step in the process is. And then during the preliminary plan review process, you will receive input from your 2 advisory bodies, the new Plan Development Commission and the Design Review Board. The public will be informed of those meetings. There are notice requirements involved in terms of notifying property owners within an area, as well as signs posted and such. So I just wanted to let the public know that if the applicant should decide to move forward with this project, they will be given opportunity to provide comment along the way throughout the formal plan development process. So just a reminder, the property is on the southeast corner of Lincoln and Elm. Currently, there are 5 vacant buildings and 1 building that remains occupied. That's Connie's Pharmacy. One option includes just the subject property in yellow. The second option includes the subject property plus a portion of the village parking lot to the east. The comprehensive plan designates the subject property for mixed uses and the village parcel for public land uses. The zoning is C2, an overlay district for the subject property, and then the village parcel is zoned B1 multifamily. As a reminder, the council had recently, in October 2018, approved a mixed-use development project on the property consisting of these elements. The council in August of 2019 repealed those approvals after the developer failed to meet specific deadlines. The other issue to note on the property is that the village is currently in circuit court regarding property maintenance issues on the property. As I mentioned and President Rintz mentioned, there are 2 options that the applicant has submitted. They both consist of basically the same components, commercial on the first floor, residential up above on floors 2 through 5, and then some structured parking that would be on the ground floor and the lower levels. So I'll quickly run through, based upon staff's initial review of the application, what sort of subdivision and zoning relief would be necessary. A lot of this is similar to what the council reviewed with the last project you approved on the site, as option 2 is fairly similar in terms of the footprint of the building. So in either option, there needs to be some subdivision relief. A plat of consolidation for option 1 in terms of there's multiple parcels right now that need to be made into one parcel. And then option 2, which would require part of the village parking lot, would require a re-subdivision of the land to create 2 parcels in the end, one on which the development would occur and the other would be the remaining portion for parking. And then there is a subdivision exception that would be necessary for that, which was required with the previous development approved on the property. In terms of zoning relief, a small portion of the village parking lot would need to be rezoned to the C2 overlay district. There would be a rear yard setback exception that would need to be granted. And then the applicant is proposing an office use along Lincoln in the overlay district. That's a special use, so there would need to be a special use granted for an office component on the ground floor. And then the last thing, there need to be a parking special use for the redesigned parking lot. In terms of parking, the applicant is proposing to provide fewer parking spaces than what our code requires, and thus they would need an exception from the parking requirements. In addition, I just wanted to point out, and we provided you with a table near the very end of all the materials comparing the 2 options with the previous project. And I provide these numbers because when we considered the previous project, we tended to look holistically in terms of parking, both in terms of on-street and within the structure, where the net gains were. So that information was also provided in your packet as background information. As I mentioned, the upper floors would consist of residential. In terms of building height, similar to the One Winnetka project, there would need to be an exception granted on height. And then another exception would be granted, would be need to be granted would be the upper story step back requirement on the 4th and higher floors, which is the 4th and 5th floor in this instance. And they do provide step backs, and I'll let the applicant describe those step backs that they are providing, but they don't meet the code requirements. So that would be necessary along Lincoln, which is this perspective, as well as along Elm Street. And then the applicant also provided some elevations for all 4 sides of the building, and those materials are included in your packet. Compensating benefits are looked for in the plan development process, and in the narrative the applicant submitted, they talk about providing the necessary utilities to serve the development, as well as installation of streetscape consistent with the village plans, and that's what they stated in their narrative. And then this table, or I'm sorry, this page just shows in summary the relief that would be necessary for the development. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to turn it over to the applicant and let them do their presentation, David. And then we'll come back to you for questions after they're done. John and Sean, microphone's yours.
Yep.
Hmm?
There you go.
Thank you. Appreciate the time. We appreciate the process as well. It's certainly nice to be able to come and get solicit some feedback from us as we try to get this development kicked back off again. So, again, my name is Sean Spellman with CA Ventures, CA Residential. And CA, I don't know if I have the slides on here. I'll go through our slides. CA, super high level. We are really a developer and investment management company focused in the living spaces. We focus in student living, senior living, and residential living. We develop about $2.5 billion a year worth of residential development in those 3 spaces in the U.S. And abroad, in Europe and the U.K., also South America. We are vertically integrated in that we do our own management and our own leasing. So we have a really unique circular feedback loop, and so we get lots of great ideas and concepts from our residents that really inform our future designs of development. So it's a pretty phenomenal operation. I think I just talked about that. A brief history of who CA is. We've been really around just about 15 years now. In that time, we've developed over $20 billion of assets, and we currently have a portfolio worth about $10 billion. So we still do own and operate a good portion of the products we developed over time with a number of partners from around the world, and both North America, South America, and Asia. So as we look at this development, bring a little more, or actually, we brought in for this one John Majewski, who I think a lot of you know. John's done a ton of work with CA in the past, and also in the area neighborhood. He'll go through some of his credentials, but certainly someone that we're excited to be working with here in Winnetka.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much. Again, my name is John Majewski with Majewski Architects. We've been in the community for 25 years now, which is hard to believe. 15 years in Glencoe, 9 years in Evanston, and we just moved down to the city, and we're in the Wrigley building. We moved there a year ago. The scope and scale of the work that we do is very varied, and I think like many companies, we grew up here in the North Shore, and the projects that we did started with people's homes. I think something like 250 homes over that 25-year period, additions, remodeling, renovations, but that really grew and really changed rapidly in a much different direction when the recession hit. And at that point, we changed our direction, and we really looked at doing all different kinds of projects, but as Sean has mentioned, most of the work that we do does involve residential. So it's always about being in the living space, and when it's not, it tends to be retail, restaurants, vibrant products that tend to go inside of a lot of the projects, a lot of the mixed-use projects we work with. The one exception, and kind of a fun thing that we do in the North Shore, is we do most of Wintrust work. So if you've seen a Wintrust bank, those are our banks. Many of those are up there. The thing about Wintrust is they want to feel like they've been a part of the community and they want to be in the community. And I'll tell you, CA does feel that same way. So tonight we're really just talking about massing. We're not specifically talking about architecture. It's way too early to do that. But we did have to give you some sense of scale with the project that we're showing. The best comparisons, I think, that I wanted to show are projects we've done here in the past. And every one of those required some sort of a variance, PD, exception for height. None of them are higher than 2.5, 3 stories. Some are different styles. The project that Wingate, which is located on Green Bay Road, was probably the largest, and that's condominiums. There's only 13 condominiums within it. But it's an all-residential building, so it really did tend to fit tighter into this idea of trying to work the Tudor style in, and then allow that Tudor style to come down to the street. Another project we did, which is very small in scale, was Westmore Commons. People tend to like that, depending on the style of architecture they like. It fits a completely different version, but did kind of tie into some of the elements that were along Westmore. I think things that are a little bit closer to home with the particular site that we're talking about are 2 projects that we worked on quite a while ago, but the Winnetka Galleria, when we first did that, to be honest with you, that seemed like that was revolutionary at the time we were doing it. I think most people feel like it fits in now, but that required all kinds of height variances and things that we had to go through to get it approved. But it's a condominium project, mixed use. And what it actually tried to pick up on was the North Shore Community Bank, which was a renovation that we did after. But initially, that was a Packard dealership. It was a strong element. We felt that idea of that limestone base and that stone base was something that was important about the community, and we kind of transported that over to the site, and then we lifted up and we worked with more of a brick and stone material above that on the Winnetka Galleria. When we looked at this particular site, there's clearly a lot of things that are very strong and very unique about it. It can be as simple as looking across the street at what we would see at Cafe Aroma on that building, to looking at New Trier Township with some of the stonework, and then as you go further down that street, we see yet another style. We do think that the BMO Harris Bank building has been one that's generally been well accepted. It has that idea of a stone base, a lot of windows, a lot of openness, and then it kind of transitions to something that is a bank and an office, but it feels like it has a residential character to it. And then I think we have to be respectful, depending on either scheme, with what we would do with the Hadley Institute, which is next to us. So with that, I'll turn it back to Sean.
So in taking a deeper dive at this and talking with some of you about what this development really, we believe, wants to be in order to find success, is that we've really done a shift towards a rental development, a luxury rental development. Really the direction of the country has been going towards rental in a pretty significant way the last 7 to 10 years, looking at all the demographics, from young professionals to empty nesters and people in between. This product type resonates really, really well in urban communities that are walkable, that are workable, and that have the residential lifestyle as Winnetka does. So as you look at these type of deals around the Midwest, around Chicago, around the country, this really bodes perfectly well for this walkable work, live, play lifestyle due to the amenities that are in downtown Winnetka. If you take a look at just traffic reduction in some of these, I mean, you all know the site a lot better than I do. Clearly, you are adjacent to the train lines. You are across the street from a grocery. You are down the street from fitness. Clearly, a super high walk store. Anticipate that this residence would really do a good job of reducing traffic in the neighborhood, frankly, because people here would not need to be driving anywhere but for maybe to work. The demographic generally at these buildings, they run the gamut, but they tend to bookend life where you're not taking your kids to soccer games and hockey practice 4 days a week. This is really more beginners and enders, so there's a lot less trip data generated. So a lot of the trip data that we have here is based on the suburban urban development that we do quite a bit of. So some good data on traffic reduction in these areas. We also certainly believe in, and it's not a phenomenon that we created, but we really do embrace the reduced parking and the use of Ubers and Lyft and other type of ride shares. We also really like the idea of car sharing. as we always have it. We try to have at least a couple of zip cars, and each of our developments will be able to share the cars. Again, walk score here is super high. As you know, urban, suburban, or suburban-urban living like this is rare. There are few markets like this in the Midwest and in Chicago. We love this market. We think that it has everything it needs to be successful. You all know that. But we're anxious to hear your feedback on the actual concept for the development. So we'll move on to that.
Basically, I think David did a really good job of running you through primarily what we're kind of up against. And I'll walk through most of these as we would look at the plan. I think the zoning relief that we're looking for is very much within the guidelines of what was previously approved. Whether you feel strongly about that, that's what we're trying to find out tonight. The size and scale is well within that. The units are larger by a larger number, quite a bit. But the square footage of what had been previously approved was about 299,000. Our option 2 is about 275,000 square feet, and option 1 is 225,000 square feet. So from a pure bulk perspective, there's a lot less there. The question will be is what we do with that bulk. And then I think we'd kind of gone through these ideas of benefits for the site. I don't know, Sean, if you want to do it, but I think we really covered everything already, so we kind of hit some of those. As we would go through the site, I want to do this relatively quickly, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover it effectively. There's a lot of basic ideas that really come into play. We're looking at the site location. The corner, I think everybody understands where it is. Lincoln's on the left, Elm is on the north. And the main idea that we had is we were trying to be with option 1, first of all, be respectful of our southern border to our southern neighbor. So we actually pulled the building back and put a setback along the southern side. That actually is one of the variances we would need, because technically the setback would be required along the parking lot side. If it's the village parking lot, it seems like a reasonable request to build up to that parking lot and then provide that similar setback along the southern part of the property. And that occurs because the site gets longer, that rear yard setback moves to the longest dimension. If we just took some of the skinny pieces along Elm Street that might be divided or had been parcels over time, their rear yard would have still been along south. So that's what we wanted to point out. We think that was an access point that made sense before. It's an access currently on the site, and so we wanted to maintain that, and we thought that that would provide a buffer. Doesn't mean we're right, but that was the assumption. It pulls, from a traffic perspective, it pulls us the furthest possible point we can get away from the intersection of Lincoln and Elm, so we know that does make sense. And it also helps us with the topography of the site of how we'd access it. Inside of that area, we envision to have an internal ramp that will take you down, and then some parking on the first floor that is really wrapped all the way around by retail, our lobby, and then this office component. The office component could be retail. It's just that we know there's a strong market demand for office, and that office might be more of a service use office. We found that on the Winnetka Galleria. I think maybe you remember Morgan Stanley was there for a long time at the back. At that time, that dedicated back space at the Winnetka Galleria was what was planned for office, and that consistently leased out. So we thought it was a good transition as we would move a little further away, heading south from the Strong Corner to go retail, lobby, directly across from kind of the access point to get to the train, then this office area, and then just access to this internal component for parking. Parking down below sits on one level right now, and that basically gets us to the total counts that we have. This concept is true for both. This is 100% enclosed. Then if I pop you back up to the second floor, I think these are the relevant floors that start to help you understand the bulk or the mass a little bit quicker. Not drastically different than the Winnetka 1 project in the sense of it's kind of an upside down U shape. That's really perpetuated by the fact that we're at a corner. We're placing a small amenity on the inside in some of those amenity spaces. And then the residential units, which really vary in size from studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, wrap around the core of the site. As we work our way up, the building slowly sets back, and we're open to the idea of setting it back more. We've just come up with an initial scheme where we've tried to take some pieces and pull it back. And as we get to that 3rd and 4th level, we're pulled back to these points. And then when we get to that 5th level, we've pulled back the majority of the building. The only place that holds that hard corner up to the 5th level was really to give some emphasis to the architectural element at the corner. What that might end up being is something we certainly are open to talking about, and I'll get to that in a second. The section really works within kind of strong relative heights that are required to do a building of this size. Retail, there's a minimum that you would like to see as a village, so we've achieved that retail. That's really in guidance and up to speed with what most modern retailers would like to see. And then we're basically trying to build a construction of a building that fundamentally goes from concrete above this. When you start at the 2nd floor, we switch to wood construction. It lifts us up a little higher than some others because we need about 2 feet, and then we have a 9-foot ceiling height for each of the units. That's what gets us up to this 62-foot height. When we show you the building, what we're really just trying to say is we're thinking of a strong retail base with a lot of retail windows, the idea of having canopies. Some of those could be fabric, some of those could be heavy, hard steel awnings that are, detailed and something that has a little charm and character to it. And then we would think from that base, we've looked at it, it could be a 2-story base if we wanted to try to deal with the mass in a little bit different way. But then we transition, all we're really thinking about right now is we're transitioning to a brick element, which is like another 3 stories. And then that top 5th story, we're intending to pull back. What that pullback could be is many different things. It could be a roof, which would then have dormers sticking out. And that would help maybe reduce the scale a little bit overall. It does add some complexity, and it does start to make the building actually taller, so that's one of the reasons we stayed away, because what would happen with that roof is the roof will rise up a little bit higher to get your average to be similar with the overall height. What would happen on that top floor would definitely be something that would most likely be a change in material, a change in the setback. It's a long building, so we do want to break it up. That's really what we're saying when you're seeing these elements today. We like the idea of having balconies. The balconies are put in that area that's pushed back from the street front. So most of the street front is pushed back 5 feet. That's where you see some of those balconies. There are a few elements as we get on the street that are kind of popping out. Those would tend to be more living rooms, and then the bedrooms would be pushed back. And then as we get up to the very top, that's pushed back somewhere between 3 to 4 to 5 feet, depending on where we're located on the site. Kind of just take you around the building. Option 2 is not drastically different, but what option 2 does is it kind of takes the idea of the Winnetka 1 footprint and pushes out into the parking lot of the village. So here's the line of that parking lot. Anything you see on the right of that line is what is added on to the building. We maintain at least the 1 row of parking, 40 plus spaces, I think it was 44 on the exterior lot, and we take away I think it's 21, of which would then go back and have 21 interior spaces. So the whole goal would be to replace whatever parking is removed. What that does do for us is it does add some retail. It increases the parking count. That all tends to work well with the mix. But what it really probably does mainly is it does add some more units. So we go from a U-shaped building to actually we have enough space now to complete that and have a courtyard that could still work. If that courtyard gets too small, it's just not going to make sense for the amenities or the actual use within the building. But this does allow us to achieve that. And then as it works its way up the building, the courtyard just becomes pretty straightforward. Courtyard would probably, this would allow us a little bit more ability to have a little more flexibility on the streetward facing or the exterior sides of the building, especially if we were to hold the courtyard kind of a little straighter in line as we'd go up. That tends to be less of an issue because it's not something that you could ever visually see from the public way. Doesn't drastically change the overall heights, just some different setbacks. And then when we look at the massing, interestingly enough, there's actually no change when we look at the Lincoln side because the building is actually the same depth as we'd go there. But when we look at going down Elm Street, it gets obviously substantially longer. It's about 26 feet longer. That's really the distance overall that we do add to the building. If we kind of run through that, it's exactly the same height. But what we end up with is, you know, compared to Winnetka 1, yes, there's more units. With option 1, we have 135 units, 156 parking spaces, and a parking ratio of about 1.1. And with option 2, we have 168 units, 176 parking spaces, and a ratio of 1.05. There These are all numbers that actually do tend to work. We would have to substantiate that with you, and I know we'd have to go through that from both a traffic and a parking analysis to show you that. What we don't want to do, and we respect your parking ordinance, is we just don't want to provide a lot more parking than we really need to. We don't want to end up with empty parking spaces. And I know we often hear that it's hard for communities to understand that parking is decreasing, but it is. The closest thing we recently did would be on Central. It's a different area completely, across from Mustard's Last Stand in Evanston. But we did about a 1-to-1 parking ratio there, and we really only ended up currently at about 0.68 parking spaces. Yes, it's adjacent to public transportation, but quite frankly, one of them's not nearly as adjacent as you are to public transportation. It's something we have to consider as we think forward what is going to happen with parking. If parking was the issue, tell us. It doesn't. There can be a solution to parking. We're just not sure it's the right solution, so we want you to be open to at least considering what that solution might be if that's something that was important to you. Height and density, we're trying to keep in scale and mass with what had previously come in. Overall, as far as what would be there. The other idea is that we're trying to create a product that actually brings a lot of activity to downtown Winnetka, and especially to this part of downtown Winnetka. We're not going to hide from that. We need a project like Option 1 with about 135 units to activate the building with the amenities and things that we think it would really need to function. Anything you want to add?
That's perfect. Great. Great. Well, thanks a lot, guys. What I'd like to do is, before giving the trustees an opportunity to weigh in on this, is just open up the microphone to folks here in the audience and have them share their thoughts. I know there's some people that live fairly close to the property and have interests, and would certainly like to hear from them as well. So would anybody like to speak on this issue from the audience? Okay, we'll start on we'll work on this side here to begin with. Second row. Ron, why don't you come on up and start it off? And I'd like you to keep your comments brief and focused on the project, not the developer.
No, I'm Ron White, 434 Berkeley, Winnetka, many years. Briefly, recalling history of Winnetka, the architectural motif uptown is English Tudor, sometimes called Tudor Revival. I think we should go back to that. And another opportunity is to stay at, get rid of the top 2 floors, except maybe on the interior, you could go up another floor, but maybe you should put a glass dome or atrium over the entire area, the interior court, which might work out very well for y'all. And, because you already have a very deep excavation, probably get 2 floors of parking underneath, like you have now. But, it's an adventure. It's a design. It's a challenge. Have fun with it.
Thanks, Ron. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Hecht. I think in light of the One Winnetka project, there are 2 questions that the trustees have to ask with any new project at this site. Question number 1 is, what did we learn from the prolonged disaster with One Winnetka that we went through? Question number 2, what are we doing to prevent anything like that from happening again? And if the village trustees decide to give a green light of any kind or any encouragement whatsoever to a project like this, it will show conclusively that you haven't learned anything. This project is essentially dealing with the same people behind One Winnetka. CA Ventures was the largest equity investor in One Winnetka, according to their testimony in the last go-around. And I recall that they stated that they had invested about $15 million in the project. And they are an enormous outfit. They certainly have the wherewithal to finance all of this or do all of this on their own. So why are they here as designee, or whatever that is, of the old Winnetka entities? The current project is, if it would ever go forward, would be much worse than One Winnetka ever was in terms of its impact on village congestion. Either 135 or 168 units versus the 58 units that the One Winnetka entities envisaged in their last go of many go-rounds. And these are all rentals. They will be in addition to the rentals that are now up and running or beginning to be running at 617 Green Bay Road in Wilmette, and also in addition to another project, again, all rentals, that is projected for 1210 Central Avenue at Green Bay Road in Wilmette, which envisages 108 luxury rentals. This is now online at the, this project is now online at the Wilmette Village website. It would be one thing if CA Ventures and whoever these folks are wanted to build without exceptions and without other zoning relief. If that were the case, I'd say give them the go-ahead, do it. But don't give them any kind of encouragement to go forward with the kind of anything at all, like the significant zoning allowances for height and setbacks and parking that they request here. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Anybody else in the second row wish to speak? Well, we'll go back to the third row. Good evening.
My name is Jerry Brown, and I live at 711 Oak. And we went through the whole prior deal. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One, CA was an investor in the failed venture. Now, were they an equity or a debt? In other words,
excuse me,
are they going to take out all of the other people, or are we still going to be in foreclosure?
Let's just hold on a second. What this is a conceptual review of the project. We're not talking about the developer or the people involved. We're here to discuss the various merits and demerits of the project. We're not here to examine and cross-examine the applicant.
Can you, maybe, I think because this process is new, and I feel like maybe we're not getting the kind of feedback that we need tonight, you know, I think you need to explain to people that we have a new planning process for a project like this. And so in order, and that was born of the fact that the One Winnetka went so sideways. And so maybe just to clarify that we're looking for a temperature on what we think of this, and that this isn't something that's set in stone. This is a concept stage, and maybe just to give people an idea of where we're at on the project, because I feel like from the comments that we're getting, I'm not sure people know that.
I think most of the people do, but at the same point, I think you made a good point. We really are here to talk about
my question is
project,
simple. Is this a new developer, or is this a restructuring of the old deal?
We're here to talk about the proposed improvements. I mean, if you have something you want to share with us about the building, about the parking, about the architecture, then that's something that would really help us out, because that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Frank, come on up.
Mr. President, trustees, my name is, and staff,
My name's Frank Petrick. I live at 711 Oak in Winnetka, next door to the adjacent to this development proposal. I've lived in Winnetka for 40 years. I've lived at 711 Oak for 10. And for all of those 10 years, it seems I've been going to council meetings to talk about development.
You're close.
Just right across the tracks.
It's a walking community.
You're right, it is. Good walk score. What I wanted to comment on was the first project had some problems, as you'll remember. That was Nutrient Partners. And one of the issues was, of course, the height. One of the issues was the density. Well, one of the issues was the design. And that project, at the conclusion, attempted to reboot to rental from condominiums, and that was not approved by the council. One Winnetka took a different tack, and one of the things that One Winnetka did, and this is for the edification of our new developers who are coming in, they met with the people that lived in the neighborhood in an effort to determine what the neighborhood was really all about. Now, this is not a campus town. Although we've got great schools, they don't go any higher than 12th grade. We've got a great school at Hadley, but this is not a town that's suited for a dormitory style of architecture. Option 2, with 168 units, is beyond the pale for density. It would destroy 3 neighborhoods. Our neighborhood at 711 Oak, which has 38 units, the Arbor Vitae neighborhood, and the congestion would spill over to the Village Green neighborhood. That's the impact immediately. In terms of rental versus ownership, a smaller facility, sure. But again, if I had an opportunity to speak with the developers and sit down like I did with the One Winnetka developer at Little Ricky's, which is also a walk, my question to them was, what do you really want? What are your needs? And I think the developers need to separate their needs from their wants. What they need to make $1 on this, okay, that's fine. But also consider the integrity of the neighborhood. This is a monolith. Option 2 is a monolith. And we know, because the Galleria does work very nicely. It's a nice building. Option 2 is not. Option 2 looks like the Nutrient Partners option did in 2011. It's nasty. It doesn't comport with Winnetka architecture. None of it, whether it's Tudor, whether it's Revival, whatever it is. And Lucien Lagrange, I thought, made a real effort to give something that would look good in Winnetka. This doesn't look good. This is a mishmash of the Nutrient Partners and the One Winnetka. That's what this is. And I think it would be good if a new developer starts from scratch, doesn't try to rush the village, respects the neighborhood, and talks and gets to know people. And I'm happy to meet with them, as I know other people in our building are. And finally, I would just ask that my letter to the council be incorporated and made part of the record. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks a lot, Frank. Anybody else in that row? Scott? No? Moving back to the next row, Louise? No Louise? Oh, we get a twofer.
Louise Holland, 545 Oak. Mary will be talking about the impact on the Hadley Institute. I will be talking about the neighborhood, just what Mr. Petrick spoke about. This is the most historic part of Winnetka, period. The Peck family lived up the street, very close to Bob. Mrs. Peck named Winnetka, and the Peck family gave the village green to the village. The first schoolhouse was at the corner of Maple and Elm. To put this kind of building, which to me looks like something like a ship, is just wrong. You face the worst part of the building east, and that's an insult to injury. That's where all the cars come in and out, or where the garages are, and it makes it an alley. And you've put an alley in the most historic part of Winnetka. That would be a crime. And I know Mr. Majewski did the Galleria. I was the president of the village at the time, and you built a beautiful building. But it was small, and there were setbacks, and it accommodated Lincoln Avenue. Nothing loomed over. This is a looming project. And Mary will speak about the impact on Hadley.
Great. Thanks, Louise.
Hi, I'm Mary Nelson. I'm a Winnetka resident, 993 Ash in Winnetka. And I'm also the Chief Operating Officer at Hadley Institute, which is the neighbor just to the east of this property. And I just wanted to make sure, we'd been talking extensively with the One Winnetka team. We mostly about safety concerns for our visitors and our staff. One of the things that was going to be done in the former development was to heat the sidewalks from Lincoln down to our walkway. Just wondering if that was part of this plan as well. Another thing that the former development was going to manage was there's a the overflow road of stormwater problem that we have that starts at the west end. It's at the parking lot and at the 7-Eleven parking lot, and it flows through our property and it impacts all the residents to the east of us. And the former developer was going to put a retention pond underneath the parking lot. Just wondering if that was going to be part of your plan to manage the water so it would flow away from the neighbors to our east.
We're not doing question and answer tonight.
Yeah,
so.
but that would be important to Hadley to maintain those two issues that were the most important for us. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Mary. Anybody else in the Louise row? Next row back, Jude. Excuse me.
My name's Jude Offerley. I live at 112 Fuller Lane. I'm getting over a miserable cold, so I'll try and keep my voice so you can hear it. I want to give some data. First, I'm going to talk about absorption. In the past 11 years, we have had a total of 167 attached units rented in Winnetka. By attached, I mean it's not a separate detached home. So if you look at option number one, basically what you've got is about 9 years worth of rental units that would be added to the village. The distribution of that is 42% were 3 bedrooms. If you look at the proposal, mostly 80% are 1 and 2 bedrooms. I can't comment on whether or not that's supply or demand, but just it's not quite a match. In terms of comparable, if you look at the building 617 Green Bay Road in Wilmette, this is the new 5-story building that is directly across from the train station that has basically nothing in front of it until you get to about 12th Street. So there's really no canyon created by this particular building. It has 75 units. It has first floor retail and 4 floors of units. There is confirmed 19% or 14 of these units have been rented that we can tell from public record. One of this has been rented twice for 1 year. Right now, we know that the occupancy is less than 88% because if you go on their website, you can find out what's available. I don't know whether or not they have it all available. I don't recall any retail unit in there. If anybody can say something about that, I'd be interested. All the balconies on the east side, which is the part that faces Green Bay Road, all of those balconies are recessed so that it doesn't overhang the sidewalk, and yes, it is built up to the sidewalk. Just to give you a perception on density, 711 Oak Street, Oak Hill Condos, and you've heard of a couple of the residents, has roughly on the same footprint of land, 38 units. In the last 13 years, 30 of those have turned over. And the proportion of unit sizes in that building are 61% are 3-bedroom, about a third are 2-bedroom, and there are a couple of 1-bedroom units. So one of the questions that I would like to propose, in Mr. Majewski's development at Wingate, which came online, I think in 2007, and was wonderfully designed, had a lot of space, but I believe of those 13 units, we actually had one that was still rented. In other words, they were not able to actually fully sell it out until about the last 2 years. So it took almost 10 years for that as a condominium to sell out. Why do people want to have rentals? Because banks will loan you money for rentals. They want to have contracts on condos for a condo building. So there's no question, I'm sure, that these developers can give us that building at what they've proposed. What I would like the village trustees to ask is, if we didn't give them all of these variances, if we complied with the zoning requirements that we have, what could you give us? And would that in fact work? And I think because of the price of the land that was purchased in the last almost 15 years, that it's probably not going to be able to be anything other than variance, variance, variance. Thank you.
Thanks, Jude. Moving down that row, anybody else in that line? Okay, back row. Anybody wish to speak there? Over on this side? First row? You guys better not. You get a dog in this fight. Second row? Third row? Come on up, Pat.
Patricia Balsamo, long-term resident, Cherry Street, Winnetka. When we first saw this design, and it's one Winnetka look, I asked Monsieur Lagrange about it, and he said, I'm going to bring some elegance to Winnetka. And I thought, yes, but Winnetka isn't the 16th arrondissement in Paris. Winnetka has its own elegance, and why couldn't he take a look at what we have of the various architectural styles? And that didn't seem to be accepted. So when I saw this, I thought, well, look, these people have done some research on potential occupants. The young lady who graduated from New Trier and wants to come back and teach here, but said she couldn't afford to live here, for example. And the 47-year-old divorcee who said, I want the kids and my wife to stay here, but I've got an apartment someplace else. I mean, those are the kinds of, some of the people who would be occupying this. But I'm wondering if the architects might not be able to put a little bit of Winnetka's traditions and values into their design. I don't think the half timber over Connie's front door, does it, frankly. And so what we want is a building that serves the community, but also is aesthetically pleasing. And this doesn't do it yet. Maybe they can come up with something that might.
Great, thanks, Pat. Anybody else in that row wish to speak? No? Nan, Wally? We're all friends, don't worry about it.
I understand, Nan Greeno, Maple Street. I understand Winnetka 1 fatigue. And I'm sure that all of you have had at least one person say to you, I don't care anymore. Just put up something. Just get it done. I'm tired of looking at it the way it is. And I totally understand that sentiment, but they're not telling you the truth. They do care what it looks like, and the results matter. And a decision you make sometime in the near future will last for 100 years. I mean, it's a very permanent kind of decision. And I keep wondering, why does it have to be this size? And economics tells me that something got screwed up somewhere along the line, and then whatever mistake was made was compounded. And at some point, when we give 2 extra stories, or whatever this works out to be, to people, it's a gift from us, the village of Winnetka, to somebody who's doing a development. Why do they need that? I guess my ultimate feeling is, don't let their mistakes become your mistakes. Don't let their problems become your problems. They have their problems, they have to deal with it. But we, the village of Winnetka, we the taxpayers, should not be making up for whatever happened in the past. Too big, too tall, too dense. Nobody cares what it looks like right now because all the other things are wrong. Thank you.
Thanks, Nan. Please do.
Chris, you've been married too. It's not that easy. Wally Greeno, I live with her. This is a great test for your new streamlined procedures. Perfect test for it. We've already had one development which you've given the rough go-ahead because it met all of your standards. And so you've shown that if something does meet your standards, you say, great, let's go off and give us a firm plan. That's one up on Green Bay Road. You should put the brakes on this proposal, and you should tell them that, no, this isn't going to pass muster. It's worse than one Winnetka in terms of size, in terms of density, in terms of parking. But the problem that maybe you have, too many people in the audience have, and certainly the architect and the developer have, is what we call anchoring. They're trying to compare this project to one Winnetka and say, well, it's really not that different, and it's just a little variation here and a little variation there. One Winnetka is not the standard. Our zoning ordinance is the standard. That's what you've got to measure this against, not against one Winnetka. And therefore, their proposal doesn't even try to conform to our existing ordinance. That's where we went wrong on one Winnetka. That's why we had 30 hearings, because we kept trying to negotiate with them after they started an anchor of a high starting point of a 60-foot tall building. Anchoring, if you accept their proposal as, well, this isn't unreasonable, let's try to negotiate and make it better, you keep thinking it's reasonable. And after 30 hearings on one Winnetka, all of us started thinking, well, maybe it's a little reasonable, we just tinker here or there at the edges. It's not reasonable. Our zoning ordinance says that. Now, in making this proposal to all of you, the developer knows that the worst that can happen is you turn to them and say, we're not interested in that. Come back when you got something more reasonable. But the developer hopes that you'll be so desperate to build something on that site that you say, okay, let's negotiate and we'll try to make it a little bit better, more palatable to people. We're not that desperate, folks. We're just not. Tell them this doesn't work. Come back when you got something better. Given the concern that 4 of you, at least on this panel, had about the effect of the music festival on the East Elm District for 2 days, think about the impact of this project on that East Elm District for 20 years. Thanks.
Thanks, Wally. Anybody else like to comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and now it's time for us to talk.
I'll jump in, why not?
Jump in, Ann.
So now I guess I understand why you guys were all laughing while we were talking about the music festival. So I like this new process. I think it's really great. I think today we'll get to say what's on our minds without it having gone through any kind of review on committees, and hopefully give some direction to you quickly so that you can redo what you're working on. For me, I felt like this project, without compelling evidence, is really against the nature of Winnetka. I think we don't have this new comprehensive study that might say to us that you really need rental properties for, essentially 20-somethings, but there's nothing about this project that reads Winnetka to me. So, and I'm in the business right now of trying to find rental properties for my 20-something-year-old daughter in other cities, and there are definitely a lot of properties that seem like this, and she actually doesn't want to live in anything like this at all because it's kind of a box and kind of yucky, and it's definitely not something that we'd want to bring to Winnetka. So when you look at those rental numbers that you yourselves threw up there, you had, numbers on renters and the percent of college degree and graduate school degree achievement, and that just doesn't align with what our community is. If you look at our community, we're much better educated, and I think our average income is higher too. So I think you have to think about, what are you really solving for in this community? The One Winnetka property was what it was, and I don't want to compare. I think, Wally, that's a great point. I don't want to compare, but I do think that it solved for an issue in the community, which was, what do people do after they sell their homes and they want to stay put, and they need some kind of gracious living environment to be in. And so I could see a case where there's some thought given to creating some kind of a gracious area, space for people to live in, to be able to remain in the community. But there's literally zero evidence that any 20-something is going to want to rent here and commute downtown to work. So I'd be curious if you have market studies that contradict the assertions, and I think Judy gave some great numbers on that, about what it looks like. The other thing is, I think, we're not being creative. Some of the things I think you put in there were interesting. Office space. I do think, my own personal opinion, Winnetka could use more office space on the first level. People have talked about it. Residents have talked about it. They'd like to have something like that. Maybe there's some kind of interesting thing to do with that. Maybe it's a hotel that we need to have. Oak Park just rehabbed their Drake Hotel sister property, and that's functioning in that community. I don't know if these are answers, but I don't think that the answer is going to be a very, very small united, high density property in the middle of our beautiful town center. So that's my opinion. It's unvarnished, and it doesn't really mean anything except hopefully it can give you some direction.
Well said. There's nothing about this village, there's nothing about this building and the concept that says to me it's about Winnetka. I had a lot of reservations about the One Winnetka plan as it went in, building as it went in. I thought it was not site sensitive. I thought that they had a concept they were trying to lay on top of a unique parcel, and I don't think they did a great job of having it fit into the context. And this building definitely does not fit into the context. It's not respectful of the neighbors on all sides, and it doesn't fit into the flow of our downtown area. I think that the point of our plan development process and the entire opportunity to have the zoning relief is that it's earned by bringing in something creative that allows it to be a building that better serves our community and also provides some public benefit. And I don't see either thing being accomplished in the zoning relief that's requested. You know, this says to me, this is much more of an urban kind of a concept. And I think that a lot more thought needs to go into a concept and demonstrated why it would be good for Winnetka before we have any more conversations about it, I think.
I'll go.
Go ahead, John.
Again, obviously, the public spoke quite a bit about this. I think the project's too big, too tall, too dense, needs some architectural articulation. It's underparked. This is not a campus town. It looks like you're proposing a campus facility where people are going to take the train to Northwestern or wherever. Lots of other things, but getting past that is a huge item. I don't see any big public benefit of us approving the project that's presented to us. Thanks.
Well, I guess I'll jump in on. First of all, I know of CA Ventures and the architect. Is a good firm and good people. Just a little bit of the wrong property, wrong village here. For those of us, again, some of us up here, some out there that were concerned about the height of the old project, the size, the density, et cetera, et cetera. This is just a repeat. So we'd be entering another really conflicted kind of moment in this town that I hope we can avoid. I would say this, that if there's any thought of any developer out there listening, whatever, there's a tremendous opportunity here. If there's a proposal that is more in keeping with the current zoning ordinance, has some creativity to it, that's a little bit different than this. There's a high demand, there's a strong interest, obviously, in a development there. There's no question about that. But I think if someone came in with something more in keeping, it would be met with a lot of enthusiasm. We've seen projects recently go through, the one on Green Bay Road by the Muse, in the past, of course, the Galleria, that were in keeping with this town, and there is it would be well received. Unfortunately, I think we're just climbing up the same mountain again with this project that probably had some deficiencies even to the old one. So, it's just unfortunate. I don't see this one getting traction.
I think, I'm not going to repeat what the other trustees have said. I think that Jude and.
Turn on your mic.
It is.
Oh.
Got to talk into it.
Talk into your mic.
I think that I'm not going to repeat what the other trustees said because I agree with their comments. And I think Jude and Wally had come up with some really good points about this. As I imagine this in place on the south side of Elm Street versus what's on the north side of Elm Street and the rest of it, we get into the same issues that I had with the One Winnetka development, which was the size of it and the bulk, and that it's out of character. And it would be a 100-year decision to put a building like this in, because once it goes in, it's going to be there for 100 years, and it would become the defining landmark of the village. And it's not, I think that we have to look at something else. I think that we just need something different.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Go ahead.
Just one thing that I would love to have happen, since you guys own the land, I wish that you could take everything down and plant a butterfly garden there right now while you're waiting.
So, yeah. It's interesting. When I saw this submittal come in, I looked at it, and it's a completely rational solution to a really irrational, what ended up being a very irrational problem. Namely, that there's upwards of $25 million invested in a piece of property that's only worth $5 million. And no matter how you tweak it and you turn it and you twist it, this is what you have to get when you pay that much money for the project. And the bad news for CA Ventures and, you know, the cast of characters that you're stuck dragging around with you, Sean, is that, you know, somebody is going to have to get real about the value of this property and be willing to make the adjustments necessary to bring something to this community that, number one, fits on the site, both architecturally and from a bulk and a density standpoint. You know, you've got an excellent, excellent architect by your side here. I mean, John is fantastic. I mean, truth be told, and in full disclosure, I mean, John and I have done a couple projects together. And I know his work, and I know his attention to detail, and I know what he's capable of. But I also know that when you're constrained by a budget that starts at a factor of 5 greater than what the value of the property is worth, you're going to end up having to cut a lot of corners or pump up the building to a standpoint where this is what you end up with. And clearly, this is nothing that the community is willing to support, and I don't think anybody here on council said anything positive relative to this. And I would highly suspect that if you were of the mind to go forward through our new plan development process, you probably wouldn't hear much different from the folks that are manning that group, the chair of which is here tonight hearing this firsthand. And it's just really a sad state. I mean, you know, the history of this project has been one, you know, in our business, the number one fault that people place on developers is you paid too much for the land. And we hear it time and time again. If you start with the basis in the dirt that's more than you can afford, you're going to end up having to do something like this to make it up. New Trier Partners paid too much day one. And Trandell was willing to bail him out at 100 cents on the dollars, and he paid too much day 10 years later. And, you know, regretfully now, we have a lender who's looking to try to find any way that he can wiggle off the hook. And I'm not talking about you, Sean, I'm talking about our friends over at Romson. And that's why they've been willing to let you go forth, because they don't want to take a haircut on the property. Well, the reality of it is people can keep marching developments like this through this council until they're blue in the face, and they're not going to get an approval. Because no matter how you dress this up, it just doesn't fit in this community. So I hope that's the feedback you guys need to go back to the office and noodle on, but I think the message from the community tonight was loud and clear that this isn't what we expect, it's not what we deserve, and it's not what we're going to support. So, thank you very much. Now, I lost my agenda again. I know I'm getting close to the end, though, folks.
Almost.
Oh, here we go. All right, item 13. I have some appointments finally this evening. Number one, may I have a motion to appoint Fuad Cotter to the Police Pension Board for a full term?
So moved. Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion to reappoint John O'Malley to the Police Pension Board for another full term?
So moved.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion to reappoint Paul Constant to the Design Review Board for another full term? Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. May I have a motion to reappoint Kirk Albinson as Chair of the Design Review Board for a full term?
So.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? May I have a motion to reappoint Brad McLean to the Design Review Board for another full term?
So moved. Second.
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That was a lot of work. Thank you, folks. Item 14, closed this session. There is none after the meeting. 15, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn? Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned at 9:45. Thank you, everybody.
One of your quickest.